Sometimes the most haunting tragedies aren't defined by what we lose, but by what we choose to live with after. Especially when love, betrayal, and power dance behind closed doors where no one truly tells the truth. Millionaire took wife off life support. Hours later, his mistress announced her pregnancy. Welcome to a story where love, betrayal, and unspeakable secrets collide beneath the glittering surface of unimaginable wealth. On the day, a millionaire husband made the harrowing decision to remove his ailing wife from life support at Mount Vernon Medical Center in Chicago, a shocking announcement reverberated through his circle of luxury and privilege. His mistress was pregnant. This twisted revelation would spark a chain of events leading to heartbreak, revenge, and a karmic downfall more brutal than anyone could have anticipated. Buckle up for a gripping journey into the shadows of a powerful man's soul and discover how the pursuit of desire can become a cage of our own making. Daniel Mercer was, at first glance, the embodiment of success. Tall, sharp-jawed, with sleek dark hair carefully combed back. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed the world was his oyster. And for a time, it truly was. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Detroit, Daniel had clawed his way to affluence. By the time he turned 35, he'd amassed a fortune through shrewd investing, real estate deals, and leveraged buyouts. The tabloids loved to capture his arrivals at star-studded events in Los Angeles and the Hamptons, always describing him as the self-made billionaire who could do no wrong. Amelia Prescott, née Whitmore, entered Daniel's life like a vision. She was the youngest daughter of a respected art dealer from London, refined and unassuming. She dazzled Daniel from the moment they met at an international art expo in Seattle. The year was 2012, and Amelia was unveiling an art installation for a small but promising gallery. Daniel, eager to expand his investments beyond conventional business channels, took a keen interest in the up-and-coming artists. He wasn't particularly well-versed in fine art, but Amelia's passion for it entranced him. She possessed an ethereal quality, graceful, empathetic, always ready to see the best in people. They shared a whirlwind romance that splashed across the tabloids. After Daniel whisked her away to Europe on his private jet, their wedding, at an opulent estate in the French Riviera, was a gathering of celebrities, top business moguls, and even a smattering of European royalty. They appeared to be an impeccable couple. Beneath the gilded exterior, however, there were subtle cracks. Daniel was a creature of ambition. He thrived on the chase, on acquiring the next big venture, on dominating every possible angle of the market. Meanwhile, Amelia was drawn to quiet evenings, nature walks, and philanthropic pursuits. She supported multiple nonprofits and aspired to open a free community art program for underprivileged youth. At first, Daniel found her compassion refreshing, a sign of her genuine soul. Her gentle nature and quiet convictions stood in stark contrast to the noise of his ambition, and in their early years he admired the balance she brought into his life. But admiration turned into indifference. As his business empire grew, his appetite for glitz and extravagance overshadowed her humility. He began rolling his eyes at her causes, skipping charity galas she poured her heart into, and replacing quiet evenings with champagne toasts under chandeliers. They drifted into parallel lives, united only in public appearances. Within a few years, Daniel Mercer was regularly appearing in Forbes as one of the fastest-rising young millionaires, soon to be billionaire. In America, he was a partial owner of multiple tech startups, had real estate holdings in several major cities, and invested large sums into the cryptocurrency market. His name was plastered across press releases, business columns, and rumor mills. Meanwhile, Amelia continued her philanthropic endeavors and quietly endured. She would often return from community centers with paint on her hands, only to find Daniel surrounded by executives discussing private jets and blockchain investments, two worlds spinning further and further apart. As Daniel's empire expanded, so did his circle of acquaintances. Lavish parties began to fill their sprawling Lakeview Heights estate, a home once filled with Amelia's delicate touches. Those pastel walls and tasteful floral arrangements soon clashed with the influx of stainless steel decor, custom chandeliers, and the hum of personal chefs turning out exotic dishes. The estate began to feel less like a home and more like a showroom. Amelia's presence fading behind every newly installed wall feature. Amelia, who had never cared much for the ostentatious side of wealth, tried her best to remain a gracious hostess. During these events, Daniel would hold court among the influential, from star athletes to film producers. He extended his net, sealing deals even over cocktails by the infinity pool. It was at one such party that Chloe Lane entered his orbit. Chloe was an aspiring actress with bright green eyes, a figure that turned heads, and a cunning sense of how to navigate wealthy circles. Rumors surrounded her, some claiming she was a gold digger looking for a big break, others suggesting she was a serious actress, overshadowed by Hollywood nepotism. Daniel first noticed Chloe at the bar, where she was laughing with a group of producers. The way she swayed her hips, her glittering gown, the sly spark in her gaze. Something about her was deliberately magnetic, like someone who knew exactly how to bait a man in a crumbling marriage. She was confident and bold, the polar opposite of Amelia's subdued composure. After that chance encounter, Chloe gradually found her way to more gatherings at the Mercer estate. She lingered in Daniel's orbit, effortlessly engaging him in playful banter. Daniel, increasingly detached from the woman who once grounded him, found the attention from Chloe both flattering and dangerous. Amelia, preoccupied with her charity obligations, remained vaguely aware that Chloe was someone from the industry, but never grasped how close she was getting to Daniel. Months passed, and the Mercer home swelled with visitors. While Amelia retreated, Daniel's hunger for success became insatiable. He took conference calls at midnight, flew to Beijing on a whim, hopped over to London for a quick meeting, and returned to Chicago within days. In a matter of days, Amelia rarely complained openly. Her upbringing had taught her to be supportive and loyal. Occasionally, though, she would muster the courage to say, "Daniel, I'd love to see more of you." Or, "We used to discuss our future. I miss that." Her voice was always soft, hopeful, not demanding, like she was still trying to believe the man she married was just buried beneath the surface of this corporate shell. He would always respond with vague reassurances. "Once this deal is done," or, "Just one more investment, sweetheart, and then we can travel." But his eyes were always on his phone, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. While Amelia's gentle pleas were ignored, Daniel began allowing Chloe deeper into his private life. Their fling started discreetly, an after-party rendezvous, lingering touches, late-night texts, and compliments that turned into confessions about how lonely he felt in his marriage. In Chloe's attention, Daniel found the admiration Amelia used to give him freely, but now he had to buy it with secrets. Before long, Daniel was sneaking out of bed after Amelia had fallen asleep to spend time on the phone with Chloe in his private study, planning secret getaways to exclusive resorts in the Caribbean. The quiet hum of Amelia's breathing from their bedroom was often the only reminder of the line he was crossing. The turning point came when Amelia fell gravely ill. At first, it was merely headaches and a persistent cough. She ignored them, thinking it was just the stress of hosting too many charity galas. But one night, she collapsed in the foyer. Daniel rushed her to Mount Vernon Medical Center in Chicago. There, doctors ran an array of tests and discovered she had a rare autoimmune condition that was rapidly eroding her immune system. Immediate treatment was critical. Daniel was initially alarmed. Whatever else was going on in his life, he could not imagine losing Amelia. In those panicked hours, Chloe didn't exist. He was simply a man terrified of watching someone he once loved slip away. He paid for the best specialists, insisted she receive top-tier care, and flew in experts from across the globe to consult on her case. For a fleeting moment, Daniel's veneer of perpetual ambition faltered, replaced by genuine fear and remorse. He was forced to confront the reality that the woman he had once cherished might be slipping through his fingers. Her fragility stripped away the noise, reminding him of vows long forgotten, promises left broken in the chase for power. During Amelia's treatment, Daniel also found himself torn between vigilance at her bedside and his continued involvement with Chloe. For a few weeks, guilt kept him away from the Mistress. But Chloe, sensing she might lose him, turned up at the hospital unannounced under the guise of being a caring family friend. She offered moral support, brought bouquets of flowers, and sat with Daniel in the waiting room, comforting him as Amelia underwent procedures. Her hand sometimes rested a beat too long on his shoulder. Her glances spoke a language only they could understand. The hospital staff, seeing her doting presence, assumed she was some close confidant. Amelia's parents noticed Chloe's familiarity with Daniel, but in their grief over their daughter's declining health, they chalked it up to modern complexities of friendship in Chicago. Strangely, Amelia's condition stabilized for a while. She regained enough strength to speak, and her spirits even lifted. Her father, Frederick Prescott, an esteemed art dealer, flew in from London with her mother, Margaret. They were determined to stay for as long as it took. Daniel and Frederick had never been especially close. Frederick considered Daniel too ruthless, but they maintained civility for Amelia's sake. Amelia smiled when her father and husband made small talk in her hospital room. Even if the conversation was forced, she clung to hope that their shared concern might bring them together. But the relief was short-lived. 2 weeks later, Amelia's condition deteriorated sharply. One night, she slipped into a coma-like state. The specialists, having tried multiple experimental treatments, admitted they had reached a point where technology was keeping her alive, but her own body was giving out. Machines hummed and beeped around her, tubes and wires connecting her to life support. Daniel, thoroughly shaken, faced a nightmare scenario he never anticipated: whether or not to keep his wife on life support indefinitely. In a quiet conference room just outside Amelia's ward, the lead physician, Dr. Cheryl Cartwright, delivered the devastating news to Daniel and Frederick. Amelia's organs were failing. They had tried everything. Extending life support would only prolong the inevitable, with minimal chance of a miracle. Frederick, tears trailing down his aging face, insisted there must be more they could do. He argued passionately that money was no object, that perhaps a new therapy was on the horizon. Daniel likewise asked about alternative treatments, hyperbaric chambers, even advanced immunotherapy trials. But each time Dr. Cartwright shook her head softly. Eventually, Daniel and Frederick were left alone to stare at the bleak truth. Frederick muttered, "We can't give up, she's still so young." Daniel said nothing initially, his eyes fixed on the floor. Inside him swirled a tempest of emotions: heartbreak, guilt, frustration, and, to his horror, a reluctant acceptance that the doctors might be right. 2 days later, a small group of immediate family members gathered around Amelia's bed. She was unresponsive, her once vibrant eyes closed, her hand cold to Daniel's touch. By that point, Daniel had barely slept. He was haunted by memories of their early happiness, the day he first spotted her at that art expo. How excited she'd been to show him the beauty of paintings he'd never cared for before. A part of him longed to reverse time, to ensure she felt truly loved and cherished. The final decision weighed on him. Amelia's parents, also exhausted, reluctantly deferred to Daniel as her husband. He was legally responsible for the ultimate choice. The medical team provided a grim timeline, explaining that if her condition didn't improve within a day or two, it was highly unlikely she'd ever come back. And so, with trembling hands, Daniel signed the documents. Tears streamed down his face. He repeated under his breath, "I love you, Amelia. Forgive me." His hand hovered over the paper for a long second, as if his signature would become the final nail sealing away the only woman who had ever seen his soul. Frederick and Margaret quietly pleaded for one more day, one more chance. But the doctors had the data. There was nothing more to try. Life support would only prolong the inevitable heartbreak. The machines beeped steadily, cold and mechanical, a cruel imitation of life. Following a strained, tearful farewell, the machines were disconnected. Amelia's vitals plummeted, and within a half hour, the quiet hum of machinery gave way to a hollow silence. She was gone. Fate can be cruel in ways that defy explanation. The weight of what Daniel had done, what he hadn't done, settled like stone in his chest. Barely 3 hours had passed since Amelia's final breath when Chloe Lane appeared in the hospital corridor. The staff recognized her as the woman who had frequently visited Miss Prescott and offered condolences. However, Chloe's face did not reflect sorrow that day. Rather, it emanated an odd mixture of anxiety and triumph, like someone carrying an explosive secret. She cornered Daniel in the waiting room. He looked hollow, slumped in a chair, face pale, eyes rimmed with red. His tie was askew, shirt rumpled. He had just bid farewell to the woman he once adored. A part of him still clung to the echo of Amelia's last breath, when another voice broke into his grief like glass shattering against concrete. But Chloe didn't bother with subtlety or tact. She sank into the seat beside him, placed a trembling hand on his knee, and whispered, "Daniel, I'm pregnant." At first, Daniel thought he had misheard. He blinked. "What?" he murmured, voice hollow. Chloe offered no time for him to process. She repeated, more loudly, "I'm pregnant with your child." The words struck him like a hammer. Time seemed to freeze in that ghastly hospital corridor. His ears rang. The image of Amelia, still and pale, had barely faded. Yet here was the future crashing through the grief with merciless timing. A nurse walked by, giving them a quick, concerned glance. Chloe exhaled sharply, forging on. "I found out yesterday. I'm about 4 weeks along." Daniel's initial reaction was anger. This revelation, coming on the very day he lost his wife, was too brutal for coincidence. "How could you tell me this here right now?" he hissed, eyes darting around to see if Amelia's parents might be within earshot. But Frederick and Margaret were meeting with Dr. Cartwright in another room. For the moment, Chloe had him cornered in private. She pouted. "I didn't plan this, Daniel, but the timing is what it is." Her voice quavered. "I thought you should know. The child is yours." For a short moment, Daniel felt as though a piece of him was drawn toward this new life. The image of a child, his child, pierced through the fog of grief like a sudden ray of light, fragile and fleeting. But overshadowing that flicker of paternal sentiment was an engulfing sense of dread. He pictured the headlines, the tabloids, and above all, Amelia's parents discovering that he had impregnated another woman while Amelia lay dying. Shame crawled beneath his skin. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the timing. The cruel, irreversible timing that would define how history remembered him. He was caught between shock and a kind of twisted relief, that perhaps a new child could fill the sudden void in his life. He forced himself to stand, ignoring his throbbing head. "We can't do this here. Go home, I'll talk to you later," he muttered. Chloe hesitated, but then, as if understanding the precariousness of the situation, she gave a slight nod and left. Amelia's passing triggered an overwhelming wave of media coverage. News outlets recounted the story of the philanthropic, gentle soul who had succumbed to a rare illness, leaving behind her grieving husband. Social media teemed with an outpouring of sympathy for Daniel. He had lost his wife, the tabloids reported, and the public mirrored heartbreak on his behalf, many remembering how in love they had looked in the early years. Photos of the couple smiling at gallery events resurfaced, side by side with somber editorials praising Amelia's legacy. Funeral arrangements took shape under Frederick and Margaret's direction. Amelia's parents were too devastated to speak publicly, but they insisted that her burial take place in London, near the Prescott family estate. Daniel consented, booking a private jet to transport Amelia's body. He covered all funeral costs, overshadowed by guilt, and made sure the service was lavish. No expense felt extravagant enough to bury the shame he carried. Guilt gnawed at him from every angle. Though he wanted to appear the grieving widower, in truth, he was weighed down by the knowledge that Chloe was carrying his child. Every condolence, every tearful embrace from Amelia's loved ones felt like a lash he silently accepted. During the funeral in London, Daniel was stoic, receiving condolences from extended family and old friends. Just before the coffin was lowered into the ground, Frederick clenched Daniel's hand and, with trembling voice, said, "Promise me you'll never forget her. Promise me you'll keep her memory alive." In that moment, Daniel was too overwhelmed to respond with anything more than a nod and a tear. His throat tightened, but the words refused to come. In that silence, he knew he didn't deserve forgiveness, but he would carry the promise like a penance. Unbeknownst to him, many of Amelia's family, friends, and acquaintances were whispering behind polite hands, sharing rumors about Daniel's questionable business deals and the suspicious presence of Chloe at the hospital. One old friend of Amelia's confided to another that she'd seen Chloe leaving Daniel's home late at night several months prior. Another friend speculated that Amelia might have known about the affair and that it had contributed to her stress. No one dared confront him. Not yet. But the narrative had shifted. His grief was now tainted by suspicion. The swirl of hushed conversation found its way to Frederick, who locked it away for a future confrontation. Returning to the States, Daniel realized that Chloe was not waiting quietly. Within a week of Amelia's funeral, she requested an urgent meeting. They rendezvoused at a discreet suite in the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago. One of Daniel's real estate connections had arranged it under someone else's name to avoid paparazzi. Chloe was dressed more conservatively than usual, her toned body clad in loose-fitting clothes. She was radiant, though, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Daniel approached her, feeling a confusing blend of trepidation, guilt, and lingering attraction. "How are you feeling?" he asked after they sat, offering a polite facade of concern. "Nauseous in the mornings, exhausted in the afternoons," she said with a faint smile. "But overall, I'm doing okay. I've seen a doctor. The pregnancy is confirmed." She handed him some papers, medical records verifying her condition. Daniel studied them in silence. He had half hoped Chloe was exaggerating or lying for attention, but the documents were legitimate. Despite his better judgment, a surge of excitement flickered in him. A child, even in the throes of grief, the notion of fatherhood stirred something real. "Look, Chloe," he murmured after a pause, "we need to keep this quiet, at least for now. I need time to—" She cut him off. "I've kept my mouth shut so far, but the clock is ticking. The tabloids will eventually find out one way or another. I can't hide forever. My belly is going to show." Daniel stared at the floor, feeling the weight of 1,000 expectations. "I know, but Amelia has only been gone for a few weeks. The media, and especially her parents," he sighed, "it would destroy them if this went public too soon. Her father already looks at me with suspicion." Chloe pursed her lips. She wasn't oblivious to the predicament, but she also saw an advantage. She was carrying the child of a multi-millionaire, potentially a billionaire. She had no intention of letting him slip away. "We can't wait too long. I need financial security, Daniel. Doctor appointments, living expenses. I'm not a trust fund baby. I need stability." And there it was, the looming condition. Daniel rubbed his temples. "Of course I'll take care of you. Let's talk about setting up a monthly allowance, covering your medical costs, everything." Chloe's eyes gleamed at the mention of allowance. She pressed her advantage. "We need a proper arrangement. Something written. I'll expect you to be involved in the child's life." Daniel closed his eyes. He felt Amelia's presence in the room, as though her spirit had come to witness this humiliating negotiation. He recalled the vow he silently made at her funeral, to honor her memory. This was not how he intended to do so, but circumstances wouldn't bend to his will. Time marched forward. In the months that followed, Daniel found himself juggling the aftermath of Amelia's passing, his growing responsibilities at Mercer Holdings, and Chloe's incessant demands. At first, he tried to shield her from the public eye, renting a luxurious penthouse across town where she could stay undisturbed. He made sure the rent was paid, the fridge was stocked, and a black SUV discreetly transported her to appointments. Despite his attempts at secrecy, rumors trickled into the media. Paparazzi snapped a few blurred photos of Daniel entering or exiting the building at odd hours, though his identity was occasionally obscured. The tabloids started speculating about a mysterious woman in Mercer's life. Frederick Prescott, in particular, was incensed by these whispers. He confronted Daniel over the phone late one night, voice shaking with rage. "Tell me these rumors aren't true," Frederick demanded. "Tell me you're not seeing another woman. Already, Amelia hasn't even been gone 6 months." Daniel evaded the question. He stuck to vague denials. "Frederick, please, you're grieving. People make up stories. The media loves to gossip. I promise you, nothing scandalous is happening." Frederick did not sound reassured. "If I find out you disrespected my daughter in her final days, I will never forgive you, Daniel." Yet, in the face of all that, Daniel was desperate to maintain control of his public image. He dove deeper into philanthropic activities in Amelia's name, donating large sums to charities she once supported. He established the Amelia Prescott Foundation, aimed at funding art education for low-income communities, fulfilling her longtime dream in an attempt to bury his guilt. The foundation's launch was covered by news outlets, presenting Daniel as a grieving but honorable widower who sought to keep his wife's memory alive. All the while, Chloe's pregnancy progressed. She texted him ultrasound images, demanded he accompany her to appointments, and insisted they discuss the baby's name. Daniel participated with mechanical politeness, torn between his new parental obligations and the heavy guilt that gnawed at him. The more he saw Chloe, the more her presence reminded him of his betrayal of Amelia. Every glance, every conversation chipped away at the illusion he'd once built, of desire, escape, and second chances. Now, Chloe stood not as a refuge, but as a mirror to the choices that destroyed everything. He noticed new aspects of Chloe's personality that unnerved him. A sharp materialism, a short temper when her demands weren't immediately met, and an uncanny ability to manipulate him with tears or threats. "Look at this," Chloe said one morning, thrusting a tabloid into Daniel's hands. The headline read, "Who is Daniel Mercer's mystery girl?" A grainy photo showed them leaving a medical office together. Daniel's face was half turned from the camera, but Chloe's was unmistakable. He sighed, reading the snippet that speculated she was a possible business associate or a cousin from out of town. "The rumor mill is going to swirl," he muttered, tossing the magazine aside. "Let's hope it stays speculation." Chloe huffed. "I don't like living like your dirty secret, Daniel." Her voice cracked, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. This wasn't just discomfort, it was pressure, a warning. "We just need to wait a bit longer," he tried to reassure her. "After the baby is born, we'll figure out how to introduce the news properly." She glanced at him, her face a mix of annoyance and apprehension. "Don't wait until it's too late. Once the belly is big enough, photographers won't need guesswork." There was no softness in her tone, only strategy, urgency, and ambition. As the pregnancy entered its final trimester, Daniel found himself increasingly on edge. His businesses were thriving financially, but cracks were forming in his personal life and public facade. The guilt of having removed Amelia from life support mingled with the dread that her parents and the public would soon learn about Chloe. His success now felt like a ticking clock, every deal overshadowed by headlines that hadn't been written yet, but already haunted him. Then a jolt struck his empire. A risky investment in an emerging tech startup collapsed after allegations of fraud. Many of his other ventures were interconnected, and the sudden devaluation caused a domino effect on his stock prices. Lawyers from multiple directions called him, panicked. Investors demanded explanations, and Daniel worked around the clock to stem the bleeding. News outlets that once praised him as a visionary investor now questioned his judgment. Even Forbes published a wary piece titled, "Is Daniel Mercer Overextended?" Frederick Prescott seized the moment. He quietly hired a private investigator to delve into Daniel's personal life. Within weeks, Frederick had more than enough evidence to confirm the affair with Chloe, and the baby on the way. It wasn't just scandal anymore, it was betrayal with proof. The day Frederick confronted Daniel was etched in darkness. A thunderstorm battered the windows of Daniel's mansion, as if nature itself raged at him. Frederick arrived unannounced, still wearing a damp overcoat. Daniel was in his office, surrounded by spreadsheets and phone calls from anxious board members. Frederick dismissed any staff who tried to stop him and stormed into the room. His face glistened with rain, but anger lit his eyes. "How dare you?" he demanded, voice thick with emotion. "My daughter, my dear Amelia, lying in that hospital bed, and you," he broke off, trembling with fury. Daniel closed his laptop and stood, feeling his heart pound. "Frederick, let me explain." "Is it true?" Frederick thundered, his voice echoing. "You got that woman pregnant while Amelia was dying? I have proof, Daniel. Don't lie to me again." Daniel's mouth went dry. He had no plausible defense. Yes, it's complicated," he stammered. "I never intended for any of this to happen. I loved Amelia." Frederick's knuckles turned white as he clenched his fists. For a moment, Daniel feared the older man might strike him. But instead, Frederick's voice descended to a bitter hush. "You took her off life support. Then you welcomed this woman's baby mere hours later. Does that timeline mean nothing to you?" Daniel tried to keep his composure, though tears pricked his eyes. "I'm sorry, Frederick. I made terrible mistakes." Frederick cut him off, choking on the words. "The entire time, Amelia believed in you. She believed you were a good man. She died thinking you were by her side, devoted. Instead, you were." Daniel slumped. "I know I can't change the past, but you have to understand. I'm not a monster. I did everything I could to save her. The doctor said there was no chance." Frederick slapped his hand on the desk, rattling pen holders and sending a paperweight tumbling. "How dare you even bring up the doctors? You failed her, Daniel. And you will pay for this." He stormed out of the office, leaving Daniel quivering in the aftermath. Over the next few weeks, Frederick made good on his threat. He hired top-tier attorneys to investigate every possible avenue of recourse, from wrongful death accusations, though doctors had cleared Daniel's decision, to moral damage suits. Anything that could tarnish Daniel's reputation and force him to face public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Chloe approached her final month of pregnancy. With Daniel's finances under stress and his public image tottering, she grew anxious. She demanded more security, more funds, and threatened to sell her story to the highest bidder if Daniel didn't comply. At last, the day arrived. Chloe went into labor at a private maternity clinic in Santa Monica, arranged and paid for by Daniel. He rushed to her side, half in panic, half in confusion about his own feelings. Despite everything, the idea of his child being born stirred paternal instincts he never knew he possessed. She labored for hours, sweat on her brow, a testament to the agony. Daniel tried to coach her through it, just as the nurse instructed, though his heart hammered with guilt. Each scream from Chloe cut through him, not because of concern for her, but because it echoed what Amelia had never gotten. The chance to bring a life into the world. He recalled Amelia, her kindness, how she longed for a family. He realized with a pang that she'd always wanted children, but they had put it off because Daniel was too busy and not ready. And here he was, about to have a child with someone else. The irony seared like a brand. This was the moment Amelia had dreamed of, and now it belonged to a woman who would never understand its meaning. Eventually, a baby's cry rang out. A boy. Chloe sobbed with both exhaustion and joy. Her tears fell freely, but Daniel couldn't tell if they were from pain, victory, or both. The moment Daniel saw that tiny infant, all pink and wriggling, something inside him shifted. This was his son. Whether under the shadow of betrayal or not, this baby was innocent. Daniel held him gently, amazed by the delicate features, the blinking eyes that peered up at him. He promised silently to do better, to be a father he could one day be proud of. But even in that sacred moment, a shadow loomed, the ghost of Amelia watching a life she was meant to live unfold without her. However, Chloe's maternal bliss was quickly overshadowed by a fierce determination. Within hours of the birth, she insisted on a formal paternity acknowledgement, naming the baby Felix Mercer. She wanted it set in legal stone. Daniel, still reeling from the emotional day, agreed to sign. Part of him believed it was the right thing to do. This was his son, after all. Still, he felt like a man sealing a contract forged in guilt, not love. But the real storm hit. Within a week, someone leaked the news of baby Felix's birth to the tabloids. The gossip outlets exploded with headlines like, "Daniel Mercer's secret son, born just months after wife's death." Accusations flew. Some headlines claimed he had cheated on a dying spouse. Others sensationalized that he had pulled the plug on Amelia prematurely to start a new life. Frederick Prescott went on record condemning Daniel's betrayal, though he didn't publicly accuse him of wrongdoing regarding Amelia's end-of-life care. He simply voiced his heartbreak and distrust. His words were quiet, but they echoed louder than any lawsuit, because they came from a grieving father. As the scandal gained traction, Mercer Holdings' stock price tumbled further. Board members called urgent meetings, worried that Daniel's tarnished reputation would drag the entire company down. They pressed him to step back or consider a figurehead CEO to mitigate the damage. His credibility was shot in the eyes of investors who once lauded him as a genius. Amid this chaos, Chloe reveled in the attention. She posted cryptic photos on her social media, pictures of a baby's tiny hand wrapped around her finger, captions hinting at new beginnings. The press devoured it. To her, it was a branding opportunity. To Daniel, it was salt in a wound that never healed. She was inundated with interview requests, and though Daniel urged her to remain silent, she persisted in dropping little hints and partial truths, fanning the flames of public intrigue. Karma struck like lightning. First came the forced resignation. The board of Mercer Holdings demanded Daniel step down from day-to-day operations to salvage the company's public image. Then came the legal battles. As Frederick Prescott's legal team scrutinized everything, From the timing of Amelia's medical decisions to financial dealings between Daniel and the hospital, though they found no grounds to charge him criminally, they effectively painted him as a morally bankrupt opportunist in the court of public opinion. Investors pulled out of critical deals. Banks grew wary. One by one, Daniel's once loyal associates distanced themselves. Chloe, witnessing the meltdown, realized that her golden goose was losing feathers by the day. She had counted on Daniel's stable fortune to secure a life of luxury, but suddenly it was threatened by lawsuits and plummeting business interests. One evening, Daniel returned home to his Lakeview Heights estate, already half-emptied as he'd begun selling off assets to cover legal bills, only to find Chloe raging in the foyer. She clutched baby Felix in one arm, tears of rage streaming down her face. "You said I'd be set for life," she shrieked, the baby wailing in tandem. "Now your lawyers say there's barely enough to keep up the penthouse lease." Daniel tried to reason with her, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Chloe, I'm hemorrhaging money, on lawsuits, on payouts, on everything. The meltdown in my holdings," she slammed a palm on a side table. A priceless vase rocked precariously. "That's not my problem. You promised me a life of comfort. I'm the mother of your child." Felix screamed louder, and Daniel moved to soothe him, but Chloe jerked away. "Don't touch him. Fix this mess. We need a stable future." Daniel's voice trembled. "I'm doing my best, but I never anticipated everything would unravel so fast. You need to be patient." Chloe's anger metamorphosed into cold fury. "I'll tell you this, Daniel. If you can't keep your promises, I'll make sure the entire world knows every lurid detail of what you did and didn't do for Amelia." Her threat echoed in the nearly empty mansion, a once glittering palace now haunted by ghosts of better days. Daniel realized that, ironically, the baby who stirred some genuine love in him was now the final link to a woman who had no loyalty to him beyond money. Over the next few months, Daniel sold off properties in New York, Miami, and abroad to cover mounting expenses. The press discovered that his net worth had plummeted from the billions to the mere tens of millions. Still substantial for an ordinary person, but a catastrophic fall from grace for someone like him. He found himself persona non grata in high society. Events, the same circles that once courted him, now whispered about him as a cautionary tale. The name Daniel Mercer, once associated with boardroom brilliance, was now a whisper laced with scandal and pity. Chloe, meanwhile, grew more resentful. Each day, she accepted Daniel's monthly payments but constantly threatened to demand more or go public with sensational interviews. She even teased the possibility of a reality show about the ex-mistress of a fallen tycoon, a project Daniel vehemently opposed. The idea of his child becoming a pawn in a primetime spectacle made his skin crawl. One day, Chloe delivered a blow that nearly shattered him. She admitted there was a possibility Felix might not be his child. She had been seeing another man, an older producer, around the same time. Daniel felt the walls close in. His illusions of fatherhood wavered, yet legally he was on the birth certificate. Even if a DNA test proved otherwise, the scandal would intensify. He envisioned the headlines: "Betrayed billionaire fathered another man's child." The shame would be nuclear. At that moment, Daniel understood the depths of the betrayal he had indulged. He saw Chloe for who she was, a cunning opportunist. But he also saw himself for who he was, a man who had scorned a devoted wife, chasing illusions of excitement and power. That realization hollowed him out. It was no longer just about Amelia. It was about everything he had let rot while chasing what shimmered. He insisted on a paternity test. Chloe resisted, but after a tense standoff, she relented. The results confirmed the child was indeed Daniel's. It brought him a fleeting sense of relief. But with the confirmation came renewed financial obligations, and Chloe refused to reduce her demands. To her, the child was leverage. To him, the child was consequence. With each passing day, Daniel's attorneys negotiated hush-money agreements and child support terms. Frederick Prescott, though unable to exact legal punishment for Amelia's death, found solace in Daniel's downfall. He publicly disassociated his family from the Mercers, lamenting in interviews that Amelia had been a tragic casualty of greed and deceit. Some media outlets sympathetically painted Frederick as a father seeking justice for his daughter's memory. His grief, tempered with quiet resolve, stood in stark contrast to Daniel's unraveling image. Daniel couldn't argue otherwise. He had no moral high ground left. By the time Felix turned 1, Daniel Mercer was a ghost of the man he used to be. Gone were the grand parties, the legion of admirers, and the adoring press. Instead, he lived quietly in a modest villa on the outskirts of Los Angeles, far from the Lakeview Heights estate he had once flaunted as a trophy of his success. He had sold that mansion for far less than it was worth, along with several prized possessions, artwork Amelia had once picked out, and even a vintage car collection, to offset mounting legal fees and settle corporate debts. The funds barely kept him afloat. Every day felt like an echo chamber of regrets. Daniel had never thought he would crave privacy so much, but the glare of public shame was unrelenting. Paparazzi no longer swarmed him in droves, yet enough prying eyes lingered to make him feel constantly watched. Overnight, he had gone from the unstoppable golden boy of Los Angeles business to a cautionary tale of greed, betrayal, and scandal. Though his finances were diminished, Daniel still paid Chloe a monthly support check. She was now living in a sleek penthouse, only because of that money, though far less opulent than she had once envisioned. Their relationship, if it could even be called that, was entirely transactional. The initial heat and intrigue that had drawn them together had been replaced by cold formality. Whenever they spoke, it was usually about child support or scheduling for Felix. They no longer exchanged endearments. Instead, they traded demands and compromises. Yet in his darkest moments, Felix became Daniel's single point of light. He visited the boy regularly, driving a subdued black sedan, long since having sold his flashy sports cars, to Chloe's penthouse. Felix would beam when Daniel walked through the door, and Daniel would hold him close, inhaling the warm scent of milk and powder. The baby's innocent eyes were a persistent reminder that not everything in life was irredeemable. In those small arms, Daniel felt a spark of genuine hope. He could be a father, maybe not the father of Amelia's dreams, but at least a man who tried to do right by his son. Still, guilt gnawed at him. Sometimes he'd rock Felix to sleep and watch his tiny chest rise and fall, remembering how Amelia had once expressed a longing for children, how she had dreamed of a family life filled with laughter and art. Daniel had always shrugged those conversations off, too busy chasing deals and attending galas. He told her, "Soon, Amelia. Let me just close a few more deals," or "We'll talk about a family after my next big investment." And then she was gone. And he had brought a child into the world with another woman, under the worst possible circumstances. Desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, Daniel funneled what resources he had left into the Amelia Prescott Foundation. He had launched it months earlier to honor her passion for helping underprivileged children access art education. Despite his diminished wealth, he continued to fund workshops, school renovations, and small scholarships. It served both as penance and a genuine tribute, but it could never repair all the harm he'd done. He found himself poring over foundation reports late into the night, reading letters from young people whose creativity had blossomed thanks to the programs Amelia once envisioned. Sometimes, when he saw how the foundation changed their lives, he would break down. It was both comforting and cruel, because Amelia, the heart of it all, was no longer around to witness its impact. Meanwhile, Chloe proved she was no longer content to be a quiet accessory to Daniel's story. She flirted with interview proposals and even entertained a producer's idea of a tell-all documentary about her life with the fallen tycoon. In her eyes, scandal had shelf life, and she was determined to squeeze every ounce of fame from it. Daniel's legal team struggled to muzzle her, reminding her of the strict non-disclosure terms woven into their financial arrangement. Chloe's frustration built each time they invoked a confidentiality clause. Her resentment spilled over into arguments that inevitably ended with her threatening to go public anyway. She began recording their conversations, dropping suggestive comments in public, and wearing designer dresses that drew tabloid speculation wherever she appeared. Amid these tensions, Mercer Holdings took on a new life under a recently installed CEO. He was a seasoned executive with a reputation for turning around embattled companies. He swiftly sold off underperforming divisions, reorganized major assets, and revitalized the more lucrative real estate ventures that had once put Daniel on the map. In a matter of months, the company bore no trace of its original founder, only the echo of a name associated with scandal. Though the brand retained some measure of prestige, Daniel himself had been cut loose from any leadership capacity, now reduced to a minority shareholder with little influence. He watched from the sidelines, receiving quarterly statements that underscored his exile. Each report was another reminder that he had been replaced not just professionally but publicly, symbolically, and entirely. His fall from grace remained a staple in certain tabloids and business columns, an endless dissection of how it all went wrong. Those who had once envied him now either pitied him or gleefully pointed to him as an example of unchecked arrogance. Sponsors, brand partners, and philanthropic collaborators he had once courted so easily were nowhere to be found. Even private invitations to events dried up. He had become a pariah with a famous last name, spoken only in whispers or punchlines. Daniel mostly found his name mentioned in grim references to Amelia's tragic end, or to the tabloids' coverage of Chloe's brash foray into Hollywood's social scene. Where he tried to disappear, she tried to rise, and both efforts were unraveling under the same spotlight. And so he went on, living in self-imposed solitude. He learned to cook basic meals, something Amelia had once begged him to try so they could share a more authentic life together. On better days, he would drive over to see Felix and feed him mashed vegetables, letting the little boy tug at his shirt, clueless about the world's turmoil surrounding him. In those fleeting hours, Daniel could pretend the past wasn't so loud. On worse days, Daniel would sit alone in his villa, scrolling through old photos of a smiling Amelia, feeling the crushing weight of remorse that threatened to devour him whole. No luxury ever brought the comfort of her laugh. No silence was as loud as the one she left behind. Ultimately, that was Daniel's price of redemption. He had not redeemed himself through any heroic act. Instead, redemption arrived in the form of day-to-day responsibility, a father's duty to an innocent child, the quiet pursuit of charitable work that carried Amelia's spirit, and a stubborn endurance of the shame he had brought upon himself. The big gestures and lavish apologies he might once have concocted were useless. Now what mattered was consistency, humility, and a willingness to suffer the memory of his betrayal every time he sought to move forward. Though he was far from finding peace, each time he kissed Felix's forehead, he felt a small burst of courage. Enough to keep trying. Felix's laughter became his only compass, a fragile thread pulling him away from the wreckage. In that tiny glimmer, Daniel clung to the hope that maybe one day he would feel worthy of the life Amelia had once dreamed they would share. Maybe by holding firm to his responsibilities and refusing to indulge in further lies, he could slowly chip away at the bitter legacy he had created. His redemption wouldn't come with applause, but in the quiet moments where he chose to stay, to show up, to endure. In the end, it was Chloe's own thirst for stardom that delivered the most crushing blow. Not long after Felix's first birthday, an event that, ironically, she tried to spin as a glamorous, star-studded affair, she was caught on camera at a private party bragging about how she had played Daniel Mercer to ensure her life of luxury. The clip showed her, champagne flute in hand, telling another attendee, "Oh, please, I sealed the deal the moment I saw that halo around his head. Men like that are easy. Just give them what they think they want and you're set for life." The leaked audio went viral within hours. Within minutes, hashtags calling her a fraud and a manipulator began trending. Influencers who once posed with her deleted their posts. Suddenly, all the sympathetic narratives that might have blossomed around single mom Chloe, left in the lurch by a disgraced millionaire, evaporated. Her social media accounts were flooded with hostile comments. Brand managers, those who had once courted her for sponsorships and talk show guest spots, backed away faster than she could issue a statement. The baby brand partnership she'd been lining up disappeared overnight. The producers who had flirted with the idea of a reality show now considered her far too toxic. In less than a week, her curated ascent to fame collapsed under the weight of her own arrogance. Chloe responded by trying to spin the story, claiming the audio had been doctored or taken out of context. Unfortunately for her, multiple sources corroborated the recording, and an unedited version surfaced. In it, she sneered about locking down a millionaire, and bragged how her pregnancy had been timed to force Daniel's hand. The truth, once whispered in dark corners, now echoed in headlines. Public sympathy swung even more fiercely against her. Tabloids that once gleefully fueled the sensational details of Daniel's downfall now called Chloe the real puppet master in a twisted show. And thus, in an ironic twist, Daniel Mercer, who had arguably done so much wrong, found himself in a slightly better light compared to her. He wasn't forgiven, but he was, for once, not the worst person in the room. He didn't feel triumphant, though. By this point, he had grown weary of scandal and heartbreak. He was already tethered to Chloe by law due to their child, but the revelation of her cold calculations allowed his legal team to renegotiate the settlement terms. Whereas before she had threatened to go public with exclusive interviews unless he paid her ever-increasing sums. Now it was Daniel who held the leverage. Their lawyers hammered out a new agreement. Chloe would receive only the mandated child support, not a penny more. She would also have to abide by strict clauses preventing her from defaming Daniel publicly. Any breach would invite legal action and immediate termination of support beyond the bare minimum required by law. Cornered and humiliated, Chloe had no choice but to accept. Her financial windfall was curtailed and her media prospects dried up. Yet Daniel did not indulge in any grand celebration. His name was still radioactive in many elite circles. The manner of Amelia's death and the timing of Chloe's pregnancy remained a stigma he could never fully escape. Though he still had enough money left for a comfortable life, the philanthropic world that once warmed to him, initially because of Amelia's kindness, regarded him with suspicion. To many, he was the man who had betrayed his dying wife, no matter the nuances of his regrets or the complexities of how events had unfolded. In the midst of these calamities, Daniel threw himself deeper into the Amelia Prescott Foundation. It was his last living link to the woman who had loved him wholeheartedly. He spent countless hours reading proposals for art school expansions and reviewing scholarship applications from young artists across the country. Whenever possible, he hosted small exhibitions, showcasing the talents of these students. Quietly, he funded their supplies, arranged for them to visit galleries, and made sure Amelia's name was always at the forefront of these endeavors. Even if the rest of the world refused to forgive him, he wanted to make sure Amelia's dreams for the less fortunate didn't die with her. Sometimes, after finishing a day of foundation work, Daniel would return to his modest villa. He would scroll through old photos, Amelia smiling at a sculpture in Florence, Amelia laughing at a private beach in the Caribbean, Amelia leaning on his shoulder during one of their first art exhibits together. The magnitude of his loss was never more acute than in those solitary moments. He would whisper apologies into the silence of his living room, unsure if her spirit could hear him. Finally, there came a day when Daniel felt compelled to revisit Amelia's grave in London. It was his second trip there since her passing. He arrived in the early morning, drizzling rain soaking through his jacket. The cemetery was hushed, the only sound the distant cawing of crows. He carried a single white rose and a small watercolor painting by one of the foundation's scholarship recipients, a child who had captured a sunrise over a cityscape, vibrant and full of hope. He stood before Amelia's headstone, etched with her name and the date of her passing. Gently, he placed the rose and the painting at the base of the stone. For a long while, he simply gazed at the grave, thinking of how few quiet moments they'd ever shared. They had always been running to parties, running after deals, running away from the small truths that might have saved them. "Amelia," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "I don't expect forgiveness. Not from you, not from anyone. I'm sorry. I let you down. I let us down. Maybe the best I can do now is help others the way you always wanted. I promise, I won't stop trying." His voice cracked under the weight of memory, the syllables barely finding their way past his guilt. A breeze whispered through the cemetery, rustling the tall grass. For a brief instant, he imagined Amelia's presence there with him. Maybe it was just the swirl of air and memory, but it gave him the slightest tremor of solace. Tears rolled down his cheeks, blending with the raindrops. He didn't wipe them away. He wanted them to fall. It felt like penance. He never felt more acutely aware of how some mistakes linger long after the world's judgments have moved on. Life's cruelest punishments, he realized, weren't the lawsuits, the bankrupting deals, or the scorn of paparazzi. The harshest sentences were the ones we carried within ourselves, the knowledge that we traded love for lust, security for deceit, and loyalty for greed. No matter how diligently he worked to redeem Amelia's legacy, Daniel would always bear the scar of having removed her from life support just hours before learning of Chloe's pregnancy. That hourglass moment, her fading breath, Chloe's announcement, remained the cruelest twist of all. And so his once glittering empire lay in tatters, his reputation in shards, and his spirit forever burdened by remorse. He returned to Los Angeles, a humbled man, clutching to the one flicker of redemption he knew, his role as Felix's father and his duty to honor Amelia's philanthropic dreams. Fatherhood, not empire, became the only title he clung to with purpose. After all was said and done, that was Daniel Mercer's karmic reckoning, a life spent walking the difficult, lonely path toward atonement, step by painful step, trying to mend the unrepairable in whatever fragile way he could. So ends this tumultuous tale of deception, betrayal, and the slow, unforgiving hand of karma. The man who once had everything, fame, fortune, and the radiant devotion of a loving wife, lost it all through a series of choices he could never take back. Even as a new life entered the world, the darkness of his betrayal cast a long shadow, ensuring that every step forward would remain tainted by a past he could not escape. Dear friend, if you've made it to the end of this story, I hope you take a quiet moment with me here. Life doesn't always punish us in obvious ways. Often, as the Stoics remind us, the greatest burden we carry is the one we place on our own hearts, the weight of what we failed to honor when we had the chance. Daniel's journey is a brutal reminder. We are not promised endless tomorrows to make things right, but we are given today. So if there is someone you need to forgive, or something inside you that longs for redemption, start now. Small acts done with sincerity can become the first bricks on the road to atonement. You don't need to rewrite the past, but you can write the rest of your story with intention. It's never too late to become someone you're proud of. If this story touched you in any way, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribing to our channel for more powerful stories that explore life's deepest truths. Your support truly means the world.